So I bought some. That's how we're gonna say it's pretty good center stage. I know a lot of people that are like do some like field trip in like elementary school, and I'm like, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, my school was like where I went to school. Like if you went to like your age or whatever, you could see. I feel like that's fine.
Yeah, what else do I know, man? My cousin lived there.
Alright, it's 3:30, so I'd like to go ahead and get started. If you haven't yet signed in, there are forms coming around. We would really appreciate it if you fill that out before you leave today. And also after the seminar, there will be some food and drink back there, and we'll have a half an hour social hour, and we'd love for people to stick around and get to know each other and get to know our speaker. And I'm excited today to introduce Cynthia Atman. When Cindy Finelli asked me who we should be inviting for this year, she was one of the names that I floated. And Cindy Finelli told me that she might be too sought after, we might not be able to get her. So I'm especially excited to introduce today Cynthia Atman from University of Washington.
You didn't factor in that I really wanted to actually visit here and find out how things are going on in the ER. You guys have a really innovative model and you're doing innovative things and innovative across the whole country. And so the chance to actually meet people here and find out what you're doing and meet amazing students, that's always the best part. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to be talking today about something. And that would show up just as soon as I plug back in and unplug so that I can do the last minute modification to the slides that everybody always does. Oops, I forgot to do that. And maybe you can help me get it up while I start to introduce. There we go. Okay, so today the topic is design signatures, and I'll talk about what that means about halfway into the talk, just to manage expectations here, and talk about empirically based representations of design processes. And first, I'll start with a story you may have heard. It's in David Foster Wallace's This Is Water, and it goes, there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit. And then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" So, an engineering design version goes like this. Several young engineers are in a product design meeting, and an old engineer stops by the meeting to see how things are going, and as she heads out the door, after getting an update, she says, "Be sure to be aware of your design process." And after she leaves, one of the young engineers turns to the others and says, "What the hell is a design process?" Which I really feel resonates for me, having done really in-depth research on design processes. My favorite definition of engineering is Bill Wolf's definition, who was past president of NAE. And that is very simple. Engineering is design under constraint. Quite eloquent. Design is how we instantiate engineering. It's how we take an idea and we put it out into the world. Also, design being a process is incredibly difficult to get our hands around and describe and teach. And so why not work on a difficult problem? As always, artists are ahead of the game. And these are a few of my favorite depictions of process by artists. So, Mountain Devil Lizard Dreaming, up here in the corner by Gloria Cattere. A 3D printed model of a moth flying around the flame by Jeffrey Mann. I don't know if any of you got to the Guggenheim to see him exhibition, which is fabulous. This is a painting of the adult process, being an adult. We can talk about that at break. And this one really resonates with me. This is a dedication from the engineering firm, the Tata Company. This is in a park in Mumbai. And it is a representation of a hand that is using the charkha, which is the spinning wheel, or one of the symbols of Indian independence. And so the engineering dedication to honoring Indian independence is the process of actually going through the whole thing. And so artists can help us figure out what process is. That doesn't mean that we don't have to actually teach it. And so this last year, I was invited to do two different things, to look sort of back at my career and summarize my research. And one was to give a keynote at the Mud Design Workshop, where the conference theme was process, and so here we are with process. And the second one is there's the 40th anniversary issue of Design Studies is coming out next month. And so I have a summary of this research in that paper. And so this talk is actually based on those two summaries across a bunch of years, diving into design processes, and not just describing the process, but trying to figure out how to teach students about the process. And so I'll talk about the in-depth research and then some teaching activities. And so the teaching activities get really fun, and you can get student responses such as this. After students had engaged in some timeline representations, somebody said, "Super valuable, much more compelling to see real data, detail, makes me believe instead of tuning out prescribed info." Can't trust how they derived it because you don't know. Spend another day in our class talking about this research, please. So us engineers really like our data and like to be in the data. And that's what I'll talk about. A lot of research, a lot of in-depth research, only possible with fabulous team members. I've worked with over 50 colleagues and graduate students and over 75 undergrads to do the work that you're going to see here. And there are names that a bunch of you recognize here. So Jennifer Turns, my colleague at UW, Robin Adams, Monica Cardella, Jim Barford Parnell, Kenya Sahara, Janet McDonald, et cetera, et cetera. So fabulous. I've been really lucky to have amazing colleagues to work with. My backstory, the reason I dove into this is because I got a PhD because I wanted to figure out how to teach engineers to think about context before they dove in to do detailed design and make things. Think about consequences. And how is it that engineers consider context? Well, they consider it, they put things into the world as they engage in design. So I turned to design as a means to an end to figure out how to teach engineering students about using context when they're doing engineering problem solving. So my goal is to deeply understand engineering design processes to enable informed teaching. My backstory really quickly, blah, blah, PhD in engineering and public policy. I was working with Boral Fischoff, Ranger Morgan, and Vera Nair, working in risk communication and mental models of, trying to understand mental models of lay people and their understanding of the technical issues behind health and environmental risks. Deeply diving into behavioral decision theory in contrast to decision theory. How do we actually make decisions? Expert novice studies. I took, first semester in college, I took a course from Herb Simon and Kurt Van Lane in cognitive science. And I was like, oh my God, changed my life. It's why I do the research I do. Herb Simon was quite an amazing person. Conceptual change theory, constructivism. The common theme across these different lenses are comparing how we tell people they should do something to how people actually do something. And so in our program, we had all kinds of methodologies, engineering modeling, but also open-ended interviews, verbal protocol analyses, surveys, etc. So I was deeply diving into, I wanted to capture the should so we can use the actually do, so we could use it along with the models we often use prescriptively, or the shoulds. And my audience is engineers and engineering educators. So that gave me the unique challenge, because I don't know if those of you in this room have the same experience, but engineers are most often convinced with quantitative data, like the student in the first slide. So What I needed to do, I wanted to dive down and really understand processes using qualitative methods, but engineers were my audience. So I just decided, what the heck, I'm just gonna do qualitative methods with really large sample sizes, or large sample sizes for this kind of method. So I embarked on a quest to collect a large corpus of verbal protocol data of engineers with various levels of expertise, and then created quantitative measures from the verbal data so I could do statistical comparisons. It was a massive gamble. It was at the beginning of my assistant professorship. I got an NSF Young Investigator Award, so I could do this. At that time, those were the precursors to the career. At that time, they were 5-year awards, so there was a little bit more time to stretch, which I definitely needed with these data sets. So, we just had the introduction. We're going to have 3 more processes, talking about research, talking about teaching, and then wrapping up. So, here's my corpus of data. I have verbal protocols. So verbal protocols, if you don't know that research methodology, somebody speaks aloud while they solve a problem. I have data from 177 individuals who solved design problems. There are data from 401 problems. 298 of them are verbal protocols. Those were paper and pencil tests. The 177 individuals had various levels of expertise. There were about 150 engineering students, there are 19 practicing engineering experts, 4 educators, and 5 domain experts. Well, 4 domain experts, 1 near domain expert. So, some people would call this insane. I prefer the term focused. So, the problems that we used were designing a playground for a fictitious neighborhood. That, in this case, the problems took about 3 hours to solve. Individuals in a lab-based setting. So those are some of the constraints that I was working with. 92 individuals designed a playground for a fictitious neighborhood. 85 individuals, and some of them were repeats, designed a ping pong ball launching mechanism, sort of like the end of the statics textbook. Designed a way to get across the street on their campus, so adding more context. And then listed factors to design a retaining wall for a flooding river in the Midwest, so more context. So I was deliberately designing problems that had various levels of context with them so that I could investigate that. And today, I'm going to be talking about data from the playground problem. So, the task, as I was saying, design a playground for a fictitious neighborhood. There was a set of constraints, and I'll talk about that in a minute. In this case, the data I'm talking about today, 26 first-year entering engineering students, 24 graduating senior engineering students, and 19 peer-identified practicing engineering experts. Had up to 3 hours, gave a think aloud protocol. We then segmented the protocol into idea units and then coded each idea unit with an activity, a design process activity. It was subject to a set of constraints, as Bill Wolf says, design under constraints. They had to keep X number of kids busy with Y number of activities. It needed to be safe, it needed to be ADA compliant, those kinds of things. And they had a budget they had to work within. I wanted to try to force them to do some sort of more detailed modeling so they couldn't buy stuff off the shelf, and they had a time constraint. Why a playground? Because I wanted something that first-year students could engage in, that you didn't have to actually have gone through the engineering degree to approach the problem and start trying to solve it. How do we define design? Okay, this is where we could have the entire rest of the conversation about how you define design. So, what we did was we went to the user population that we were talking with, and we did a content analysis of 7 engineering textbooks and how they talk about design to teach freshman students. So I went to how the language that's being used with the participants that I was talking with. And so they'll look familiar. Identify need, define a problem, gather information, generate ideas, model, feasibility analysis, evaluation, decision communication, implementation. We gave them the problem, we didn't have them build the playground, so in our case, we don't have identify the need and implementation. These form the basis of the problems. And what I would now like, if you could start passing out the envelopes. You're going to get some envelopes, don't open them yet. So the data collection looked like this. The participants could ask for information for experimental setting. We did the coding I talked about, and we came up with timeline representations, which I will talk about in just a minute. And another thing I wanted to make sure that you know is that we also took their solution and evaluated the quality of the solution. So it doesn't matter if you have a beautiful process in the engineering world if your product doesn't work, if the bridge falls down, if someone is hurt. Design process timelines are one way that we represented these data. And a timeline you can think of is a trace of activities over time. And any instance of a design process, if you looked at it with respect to a set of codes, would have some sort of tracing or would leave a design signature. And a timeline is something where, with time going from left to right here, you see each one of these lines has one of these codes, and a slash on the line means that this individual spent time at right here in problem definition, then gather, then gen, then model. So for example, in the protocol, when they said, do you have a list of materials? That would have been coded as gather. So that's the representation. What I'd like you to do now is take one of these envelopes and pull out, you'll find 6 little white timelines. Leave the purple sheet in there, it's the answer key. Last set of people I worked with pulled out the answer key. So, when you have the 6 timelines, what I'd like you to do is that the 6 timelines are 3 first-year students and 3 graduating seniors. So, there are 2 groups of 3. And what I'd like you to do first is choose the 2 timelines that you think led to a high-quality artifact. So there's one each of a timeline for first years that led to a low-quality artifact, low-quality product, middle-quality product, and a high-quality product. And then low, middle, high for the seniors.
Can you remind us what the codes are?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's on the other side of your envelope. There's a key on the other side of your envelope. I am an industrial engineer. I knew there would be that question. And I can go back actually and put it. There it is on the screen as well. Oh my gosh. If you have time after you have picked the 2 that you think led to the high quality artifact, then fill out the rest of the set. See who you thought was low and middle quality in the first years and in the, oh right. Oh, don't turn them over either, because that's the answer. Look at the top of the timeline. Yeah, I didn't say that. I forgot. Okay, just a couple more moments here. What's that poker game where you put something on your forehead?
Headbands.
Yeah.
That's the kid game. That's the one I know. The kid game is headbands.
Okay, so I'd like you to hold up the 2 so we can all sort of see which 2 do you think led to high quality products. Yeah, so everybody look around, and I think that, yeah, we've got pretty consistent results, and I think everybody pretty much is right. So here are the answers. What we found, these are timelines that are chosen to represent typical processes for students with low, middle, and high quality end products. And it turns out that what people were choosing were these timelines leading to high quality artifacts. Does somebody want to tell me a reason why you chose this one? Yeah.
More understanding the requirements.
More understanding the requirements.
I mean, I read that as more iteration of trying something, thinking, making a decision, doing something.
More iteration, trying something, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. More iteration, trying a broad set of activities. Yeah. So, you're all correct. The ones with the high quality had all of those attributes. Our hypothesis going in for the first year students was that most of them would look like this. And that is to, what this student did, and this is a bit of an extreme example, but read the problem statement, gathered a couple of pieces of information, came up with one idea, and then just modeled the heck out of it. Yeah. And that, by and large, is what many of the incoming first years did. This was a surprise for us. The lowest, about a quarter, a little bit less than a quarter, basically read the problem statement, thought about it, gathered something, read the problem statement, could never actually come up with an idea and do any modeling. They just got stuck and quit.
Oh, is that why it's so short?
That's why it's so short. Yeah. And then you see the graduating students all end up, even with the low in the middle, have a longer period of time in the front where they're scoping out the problem, gathering information, generating idea, going back and forth before choosing modeling and going into modeling, and spend longer on average solving the problem. So, when we look at the statistics, remember I was coding the qualitative data with large enough sample sizes so I could do comparisons. Graduating students were significantly more likely than first years to have higher quality designs. I was really relieved. I could have published the results and gotten tenure anyway, but it was just really nice to have that be part of the story. The seniors made more transitions among design activities. They scoped the problem more effectively by considering more categories of information, and they progressed, quote, farther in the design process, meaning that they were more likely to get to decision and communication, is in contrast to the first years who didn't. The graduating seniors were also, Robin Adams did an analysis of a subset of these data and found that graduating seniors were more likely to effectively iterate, because an iteration is a specific set of transitions. They iterated more often, were more effective, and their iterations were more likely to lead to a change in the process. If we look at the 19 engineering experts, and their processes leading to a low, average, or high artifact quality, we see more complexity throughout. And here you can see, and you can do a squint analysis. You can also see that the engineering experts, on average, spend longer at the table. They just spend longer solving the problem. The experts were significantly more likely than students to spend more time solving the problems in all the design stages, so it wasn't like they focused just on one stage. Scope the problem more effectively by gathering more information and covering more categories in the information they gathered, so they were thinking more broadly. They spent longer, this is really important, spent longer problem scoping before they pivoted to modeling. So they waited to choose what they were doing until they understood the problem more. They considered more objects in their design processes And they exhibit what we call the cascade pattern of transitions. So a cascade pattern where it's going from upper left to bottom right. And when we did actually a pile sort across the three samples, we found that engineering experts were much more likely to have, this was percent of cascade shape, way more experts had cascade than graduating students than first year students. And I use the word cascade, not waterfall. So waterfall models are typically linear, go from one to the next, and then you're done. The cascade is also going down, but you can see that there are eddies, there's going back. It's like a cascade over a hillside, not just a waterfall over a cliff. The timelines end up being really interesting canvases to convey the results and several other things. And so I'll just go through those. Here you can see the larger level of problem scoping before choosing an idea and diving into modeling. Here you can see problem scoping throughout the process. So super important to gather information even while you're in the midst of modeling when you have questions. Those transitions moving towards gathering information are key. Transitions are key. You end up having periods of high transitions or high iterations looking at Robin's research. And there are times when it's important to go, okay, I'm going back and forth, I'm really scoping, I'm trying to think, I'm trying to decide. And then there are times when it really makes sense to stay the course. So pivoting is important, persistence is important. Timelines as canvas, the cascade shape, another one of the students in a student exercise sketched on top, used the timeline as a canvas and sketched what they labeled the ideal project envelope. Spend that time problem scoping before you get into modeling. Make sure you get to communication at the end. Going back to why I was doing this research to begin with, to try to figure out how to teach engineering students about context, the gamble paid off. The data actually do, and the representations show that in order to teach students to think broadly and problem scope and think about context, if you talk about a cascade shape or an ideal project envelope, you scope a problem before turning to modeling, you gather information throughout, and make sure that you transition and pivot when you need to. Then you can be gathering the contextual information to understand the problem and make sure that you're designing solutions that aren't going to be having negative consequences or reduce the probability. We can never ensure that. What about the rest of the data? I'm going to zoom through the rest of the data. We see similar patterns, basically more experience, more complex processes. I've been living with timelines on whatever hallway outside my door for decades. This is a table from the article that's coming out in Design Studies next month that shows the first year graduating engineering experts and then the domain experts. I ran a follow-up study about a decade later trying to poke holes in my results to see if I could replicate the results. And with a much smaller sample, so I can't do the stats, I do end up with many consistent findings with 6 first years and 8 graduating seniors at a different institution. So, we also collected data from 4 playground designers. All 4 of the playground designers got made high quality artifacts. That was like, okay, quality rubric was good. They also, all 4 demonstrated cascade shapes in their processes. They were very likely to consider the contextual aspects, like where is the playground, what are we doing with the students, those kinds of things. And they asked very generative questions. The questions that they asked actually really moved the process forward. Also collected data from 4 engineering faculty, 2 MEs, 1 IE, and a nuclear physicist teaching nuclear engineering. You guys, you all will not be surprised to know that the highest variability in the data come from the 4 engineering educators. The quality, 2 got low and 2 got middle quality. There was only 1 cascade shape among the 4. And that shouldn't surprise us, right? We don't hire engineering faculty to be designers. These were engineering faculty who taught regular engineering courses. And so the fact that they didn't demonstrate expert processes just helps us understand the challenge that we're facing in all of our endeavors here. The individuals, the students who solved the ping pong and the street crossing, I mentioned earlier that the NYI was a 5-year award. Well, I did this study early, and I still had money when the students were graduating. So I found a subset of the original students who did across the first semester and they asked them to solve the problems as they were graduating seniors. And so I had 32 first-year students, 61 graduating, 18 of the 61 were within subject design. So I did within subject and across subject and showed basically also graduating seniors have more complex processes than incoming freshmen. And we were able to look, most of the 18 within subject students progressed in their design processes. A couple stayed the same and 1 actually even had less enthusiastic designs as a graduating senior. And so we need to think about that, but thankfully most of them actually looked like this. So you could see more complexity, more problem scoping before diving into modeling, and some cascadey kinds of shapes. We also, DTRS, whoa, 30 minutes in. We're here an hour and a half, is that it? Okay, we will go faster. Another set of data with teams in the Design Thinking Research Symposium, I think it was 7, had an engineering team data. So we applied the same coding scheme. They were only at the first part of the design process, but you could actually start to see a cascade shape happening there. Timelines as canvas can also be used to test other people's framings, and so Robin and Jennifer and I took the data and used it looking with Schoen's reflective practitioner frame, and you can see problem setting and back talk here in the timelines. And so many people told me that when they looked at this, the timelines looked to them like music that personified them.
Huh.
So you can go to this, and I have bigger, that you can find soundtrack stuff. I've got these I can hand out at the end that have a little bit more data than your little envelopes. I'm going to show you 2 of the sonifications. One is for our incoming first-year student who had an average quality design. Or, to be specific, the sound of a design process that led to an average product. Let's listen to the graduating senior with the high quality product. Revisiting the concept of design signatures, I talked before about signatures as being a tracing of activities over time, and any design process you've been in has left some sort of design signature, some sort of process behind it. bless you. And so each of these individuals engaging with the same problem left a different signature. So continuing with the concept of a signature, I don't know about you, but my signature when I buy a cup of coffee is way different than when I sign a reference letter. So we could imagine that if you could think about using these design timelines as a tool, before you engage in a design process, you're redesigning your house, you are a student in a semester-long design process, you have enough time, you could think about these kinds of timelines and choose a signature that you want to leave at the end. I have enough time, I really want to make sure that I do a robust set of iterations, gathering information throughout, checking my constraints, etc. On the other hand, if you are there for a Saturday afternoon hackathon and you have 4 hours, you're dead. So, you want to gather some information, but you actually need to choose something and then just run with it if you're dealing with a tight time constraint. So the timelines can be a useful tool before you go into a design project and process. Think about ahead what kind of process you want to use, and also as a guide for check-ins throughout. You can also think about a different use of the term signature. So you can have a signature move. Simone Biles has signature balance beat moves. So I invite you to think back on the times that you have engaged in design and think about the design timelines and think, do you have a design signature? Is there a typical way you engage with design? And I'll leave you with that thought experiment as I sum up and say, okay, that was an insane number of data from 177 individuals. I talked about the data collection, the analysis, the representations, and talked about how descriptive design models can be useful as design signatures. So now I'm going to go through a rotation where I talk about some of the ways that I've used to teach design. And we'll speed up. So about 15 years into my research, I started to go, okay, cool, got some results. Now, I really actually wanted to figure out how to teach. So the difficult problem of translating research to practice is what I'm going to talk about now. How can the findings be useful for teaching design? We teach design in so many different ways. We have to teach design in so many different ways. Teaching a process, you need students to have a large number of experiences so they can triangulate. Capstone, science line, disciplinary design, maker spaces. Inside the larger landscape, when we talk about design models, we typically use node and arc representations. These are the activities, and then there's arrows, and remember, you have to go back. So, when you contrast the timeline, these are node and arc models of the exact same activities. If you think about the affordances of the representation of the timeline is one specific instance, not an abstract model. A time is explicit. Abstract concepts are made visible, they're grounded in data. There's something you can personally identify with, and it makes the representations both concrete and also very sticky. And what I propose is that they're useful to use in addition to the traditional node and arc models that we use prescriptively. They're useful and sticky. When we use these models and say you need to iterate, it looks like this, and students going, what? And with the timeline, you can say this is what iteration looks like. When you need to persist, you say, okay, make sure that you spend enough time prototyping. And here you can say, make sure you actually spend time prototyping. Another quote from a student who engaged with the timelines, realizing taking your time is important.
gather data and define the problem more thoroughly before modeling, which is so cool to see as statistically relevant. Because now I can prove to people that understanding the problem first is crucial for success. This looks like a civil engineering student who maybe had some frustrating design projects. So timelines as teaching tools. You see card sorting tasks that I've recently been starting to use end up being very generative. Presentations, coding sheets for a fishbowl exercise, classroom activity. I'm going to zoom through a couple of these and first talk about a classroom activity where I basically present the 6 timelines that we've been talking about, ask students to observe similarities and differences between first year and graduating students. Do they connect with the quality score or not? And the students are able to replicate the statistically different results just with this one exercise. I generally have the students first sketch what they do with design before I engage in this, so we're anchoring them in their prior experiences. And in about 45 minutes, they're saying things like, when you ask what's the most important thing, problem definition is key to the overall project. Remind yourself of what you're doing and what is really being asked. Pick your head up from the paper and analyze the problem. Success is strongly correlated with gathering data and defining the problem early on. So this really short exercise ends up teaching students some really important attributes of the design process, and I wanted to repeat the ideal project envelope here because it's such a visceral response. We've done multiple studies with this in the classroom and find that, what will this information affect how you do design in the future? How students say that they'll iterate, they'll be broad, they'll include problem scoping, etc. I teach a teamwork and communication class. It's a 2-hour class. I do this exercise first and then immediately follow that with a design challenge with teams of 3 with like the Marshmallow Tower building. So we're all familiar with that. But what I do is I also have a user researcher for each group. Observe the researcher. They've just learned the coding scheme and they code where the student team is with respect to the activity codes. And then right after the challenge, we're able to actually have the user researchers describe what they see. I just did this last week with 10 teams, and 8 of the 10 of them had cascade shapes. And so it's really having students dive in and experiencing what it's like to feel a cascade shape and then see the data. It's really rewarding. End of the quarter survey, like the activity was several weeks back. All the purple is good. Students liked it, they remembered it, it was worth their time. With questions, or I can talk about mapping to research on learning concepts that I use when I design my courses. And we'll very briefly talk about more in-depth experiences with a couple of design briefs that Janet McDonnell and Amber Mojave from Central St. Martin's developed. What they did was they took the classroom exercise task and created a design brief where we gave students the data for all the 9 timelines that you had. So we gave them the Excel code, we gave them the timelines and the coded sheets. And we asked them that Janet and Annabeth asked them to develop a new design representation from the data. And then after they did that and saw each other's, the second design brief, they had a week to do that. They had maybe 2 weeks to do the next one. We gave them an hour or 2 long design problem, had them solve it, they had to record themselves somehow, and then they had to represent their own design process. Amazingly creative responses. Here are some responses from undergraduate students in my department, Human-Centered Design and Engineering. Their representation of our data, their representation of their own processes. And then at the end of the seminar, I had them create a memory aid of what they wanted to remember from the design process. And these are the representations of their memory aids. Really, really creative insights that were very innovative. What I'm doing now is working with some students. You can know about design, you can intend, I'm gonna iterate next time I'm in a design process. I'm gonna, do X, Y, or Z. So you can intend to do something, but it's awfully hard to remember to do it. So what we're doing in the seminar is examining the concept of design awareness. So in order for you to actually take the next step, you need to be aware of where you are right now. So some amazing students worked with me building on the timelines. They traced past processes, did concept mapping, ideating, and prototyping, and developed some prototypes, paper and pencil prototypes for tools to help them stay aware during the design process. And so we are doing a follow-up this quarter, and in a couple of weeks they'll have designed something that they can use to try to help them remember to iterate, or whatever it is that they're choosing to do. I asked them for synonyms for design awareness, and they came up with some amazing things like imperfect is perfect, conscious design, fluidity, collaborative design with your unconscious mind. See the rest of the iceberg. So, good timing for wrapping up, the food just got here. Thinking about processes, trying to describe processes, and trying to teach processes are super difficult. An undergraduate student from, I gave a talk back at my undergrad institution. I was on a Friday afternoon and there were a lot of students there. I'm like, what are you doing? Anyway, one student was trying to tell his students who skipped the lecture. He sent me an email afterwards saying he was talking to his friends who didn't go. He was talking about how this is related to life and how we need to look at everything from several perspectives in order to get the most out of what we want to do. But I think I really understand what your results say on numerous levels. It's not that people avoid the path less taken, but rather they don't even see the path less taken. So it's really amazing actually how these representations have sometimes some transformative kinds of effects. Today I talked about empirical research that describes the complexity of design processes, timeline representations as design signatures that might be useful as tools, some example teaching activities, which give me a little bit of time, but they're going to be available for people to use, and send me some email, so you can find them here, and that address is here. You can take these on the way out. There's also some handouts. However, slight warning. Once you are captivated by timelines, you literally see them everywhere. Ask my children, it's not a feature, it's a bug. A graduate student, Dharma Daly, who is in a PhD course on design thinking that I taught, was also captivated by the timeline. And she is a member of an a cappella improv group. And so I gave a presentation to their improv group, and they sang a response to them. So I'm going to play two of them for you. The first one is a response to that average equality incoming first year student. So the first one is this one. Second one, and I'll leave you with this, is about a minute and a half performance, so a minute and a half expectation management here. So, and this one, you can see that their takeaway was about the rich complexity of design and how things interweave and how a beautiful design process really is complex. There's time for 0 questions, oh no. Do we have a few moments for some questions? Okay. Yes. Yeah, so the question is, the accurate observation is variability in the first year students. And actually, you correctly note the variability across the individuals decreases as expertise increases. So the first year students came from all over the map. They were in all different kinds of majors with lots of different experience and had never been taught about design. So they had a lot of difference. And then by the time you get to the experts, it was just a lab-based task, but they knew to stay with it. They knew to gather information. They had experience for the design process. So really good observation. Yeah.
I guess kind of along those lines, a couple things kind of came out. I wonder if there was, maybe you didn't have enough sample size to do this, but if you could look at potential differences in design experience coming into the first year. Some of these students are going to high schools that they might be in maker spaces.
Right.
So whether you might see some of those differences and whether those converge over time.
So first thing, these data are pretty old, and maker spaces did not exist back when these data were collected. But completely true, there would have been a wide variety of experiences going in, and I don't have that data, and it would be super cool to look at. Yeah, and even greater now, perhaps, with maker spaces and some students having fabulous experiences. But the fact that the incoming student who had the complex process, so there are some students, there were a couple that really looked that robust, and so it was quite interesting to see that maybe they didn't need engineering.
So you're located near one of the companies, Boeing, that makes some of the most complex products in the world.
Yes.
And I was curious, you didn't have any of them in terms of design in your studies.
I may have. I think that I probably had Boeing engineers in the expert engineer sample.
Do you ever do any in-depth studies with them?
In situ? No. Yes, that would be these data. I should definitely talk about these data have a lot of limitations. Lab-based, individual, with this particular coding scheme, and so they need to be triangulated with ethnographic studies in the workplace, with studies with teams, with larger numbers, this is one data point, well, not just one data point, but this is one perspective. It turns out to be resonant with people's experience, and I think that's why the timelines end up actually really resonating with people. When I would talk with Boeing, there are some advisors, and I show the timelines to industry partners, and they go, oh yeah, we hire these people. And they're pointing to the ones that aren't necessarily the good design processes. They're pointing to the first year ones, like, okay, we're hiring students who are not actually sticking with it, who are not gathering data. So
That's a point of view.
yeah. widely variable.
So, I have a question, how did you define, when you actually looked at these, you said if some lead to better quality results than others?
Yeah.
Exactly how did you define quality?
So for the playground problem, the quality was assessed, there were 3 attributes to the quality score. One was whether or not they met the constraints that were given, was 1/3. The second third was actually using playground standards. If they designed a swing, then we went to the swing standards and said, would your swing stand up? And then the third part was a qualitative scoring of like, would the kids have fun? Did they actually think about a place for the parents to sit down? So we put a lot of thought into actually making sure that the quality score was something that was, of equivalent heft as the process.
Have you had the chance to examine sort of the teaching interventions and whether or not students who have had, say, participated in the fishbowl, as an example, if they've had a chance to compare those to those who didn't, and to see what, if they had a design process in the class? Like,
No, but if you want to do that, I would really, really appreciate it. Yeah. Anecdotally, I have students who contact me years later and say, talk about how the timeline really sticks with them. We have survey data about whether they enjoyed it, but we don't have that kind of data. Yeah. Okay, one last question. Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. Do you think this process could be used, maybe not just for the design process, but like coding maybe what parts of the designers are focusing on, or do you have any other ideas for applying this?
So tell me a little bit more about parts of the process.
So like, if rather than exactly which phase of the design process
Yeah.
we're working on, but maybe like what aspects of the features
Oh,
or
yes,
is there other
yes,
ways?
definitely. So we also looked at what they were working on. So we have timelines that go along with these of the objects that they were working on, and whether they were working on something like a swing or environmental kinds of things like benches. And it turns out the graduating seniors are actually more likely than the freshmen to think about the environmental context kinds of things. So yes, and that I haven't looked at it as much detail as these, but that would be a really productive thing to do. Another thing I think would be really interesting is to toss out my design activity codes completely and use the ones from the Node and Arc model that you use in your design process. So whatever the Node and the NASA one that you were talking about yesterday. No wait, Lynn, where are you? Sorry. What if you erased my codes and put your codes in there, and had speculations? It's a hypothesis. You have to actually. I would not suggest doing 177 2 decades later, but for a teaching tool, to use the models that people are familiar with and the terminology and the language that people are familiar with these concepts, I think could have a high payoff. So that's another way to sort of do a variation, bring it into what you're doing. Yeah. So morph it, please take it and morph.
So thank you, Cindy, for coming. Perfect, and I know you're gonna be able to stick around for half an hour or so, and we have some snacks back here, so just a time to have some conversation and network, so please do stick around and join us. What, would you like these back?
No, you should keep the envelopes, and I take these too, yes. Oh, the special is very easy, that's
About a lot of things, a lot of time, like they would have ideas for their favorite playground, like what kind of like. They give like
That was on the not really, so I don't
Oh.